If you ever feel out of control around food, you're not alone, and you're in the right place to learn practical, no-nonsense information about why you binge and how to stop. Binge eating does not mean that something is wrong with you. It's a natural but primitive brain response that you can correct. If you're ready for change, sign up for the Brain Over Binge self-paced online course for less than $20 per month. And if you feel you need personalized support, we also offer one-on-one coaching and group coaching. To learn more, go to brainoverbinge.com/subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the Brain Over Binge podcast, where you learn a simple, brain-based approach to ending binge eating. I'm Katherine Hansen, and I have a conversation to share today that I hope you find inspiring. This is another Recovery Stories episode, and for a little background, those of you who have listened to the show for a while know that back in August and September of last year, I shared 6 Recovery Stories episodes. On each episode, I had between 1 and 4 people to talk about their own journey with an eating disorder and to explain how they were able to find freedom from binging and the struggle with food. I released those episodes shortly after I published the second edition of Brain Over Binge last year. And the guests on those 6 episodes also had shared shorter versions of their stories in that second edition in a Recovery Stories chapter at the end. I'll link those episodes in the show description for those of you who have not listened yet, because they really show what's possible and how everyone's journey is unique. When I was just finished recording and editing those episodes last year, today's guest, JD, who I've been in touch with for many years, emailed me offering to share her recovery story on the show as well. I thought it was a great idea, but one thing after another came up, and it took me quite a while to get back around to it. But it's better late than never, and I think you're going to really find JD's story very helpful. She's been binge and purge free for about 20 years, so she definitely has a lot of wisdom in what she talks about. What connected us many years ago was the similarities in our stories, especially in that both of us came across Jack Trimpey's book, Rational Recovery, back in the early 2000s, and it made a massive difference in both of our lives. And this was way before Brain Over Binge even existed. Then, when JD read Brain Over Binge years later, it helped her with some other food struggles that she was still having, especially an attachment to food restriction and not really knowing how to eat. But I'll let JD tell the rest of her story, and then I'll be back at the end with a couple of additional things to share with you. Hi, JD. Thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing more of your story. I know it will be very beneficial for the people listening. And just to get started, how did your eating disorder begin for you? I know it was early on in your life.
Yes, it was a very strange intro into an eating disorder, because I like to say I had an eating disorder sort of handed to me without me creating one on my own. My father worked in showbiz in a kind of a high-stress TV career in New York. I'm an only child, and he would not eat all day long. And he'd eat like a huge dinner, his choice, in front of the TV, getting served on individual tables, and then he'd proceed to eat throughout the entire night. We never ate at a table. That was our method of eating, in front of the TV. So my mother would serve me literally meal for meal in large quantities what he would eat through the night. They're both skinny as rails and no food issues, but that was just the way he ate. So I was consequently overweight, and that was just not flying with me. I wanted to be an actress. I wanted to be fashionable. I lived in New York. I'm like, oh, hell no. So I got a hold of a magazine once, and it said at about 11 or 12, some people have glandular diseases or something like that, and that's why they're overweight. So I grabbed onto that, and I basically started hardcore dieting, hardcore restriction, actually shut down my menstruation. And by the age of 14, I met this, I was telling me she vomited. And I tell you, Catherine, I thought, okay, this is the solution. I can eat calories in, calories out. And that was a disaster. So that's kind of how it started. Now, also, I must say that my mother, although she's a wonderful person, just was not a parent, just was not able to step in at any point in time. In fact, when I was, I want to say 10, In the 70s and 80s, there was a product on the market and it's like an appetite suppressant candy. Like I told my mother, can you buy me these, please? And so I'd be popping them. Thinking that would make me lose weight. Like she just was not plugged in.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, through the habits of your parents, it was almost like they taught you to binge at night.
Right.
And then when you were, understandably concerned about your weight, they just kind of allowed you to diet without really trying to help.
I've said to her in present day, like, why didn't you do anything? And she's like, well, you wanted the food too. And I'm like, well, yeah, of course. To the point where if I stayed at another kid's house, I was like, why aren't we eating after the main meal? Like it was just, it was ridiculous. And my mother's a total normal eater, but he had this weird, and I've even asked him now, like, how do you eat now? He said, I just eat one meal a day at night. But that's just his method. But from working and being younger at the time, having a high metabolism, he ate a ton of food at night and she'd serve me plate for plate, which was obscene, but that's the way it went down. So unfortunately, I went to years and years of groups, therapy, OA, everything. I purged for 17 years. Like I couldn't stop. And I thought I'm going to be going to my grave with this.
And you were binging too, right? You're binging and purging.
Oh yeah. My focus was being thin. And it was odd because, I have these rail thin parents. Why should I be fat? So I believed I have a glandular disease, which is what I read as a kid. And, without anybody helping me to figure out what was going on, like, hey, we eat mass amounts at night. That might be the problem. Yeah. I wasn't aware of that. Like, oh, that's what's doing it. I was 11 years old. So anyway, started purging at 14. And I don't know, I'm not doing the math right. I stopped for a couple years, but then I did like a 17-year straight purging, all the while going to these groups and therapy. Let's uncover the underlying trauma, the problems, without anybody ever saying like, hey, this is a conditioned habit that you learned from birth. So fast forward, this was like 17 years ago, gave me $15,000 to go to an inpatient eating disorder program in Florida. And I flew down there with my mother and we went through the not orientation, but like an interview. And it was the same thing. We'll uncover the underlying issues, stress related and mental health and spirituality. And I was like, hell no. So I left there and he said, keep the money and do something else with it, to try to overcome this. And I thought, okay, I will get to the bottom of this myself. So during that time, I had my aha moment like you did with Jack Trimpey's book, New Cure for Substance Addiction. I found that book, never had a substance addiction in my life, no alcohol, but he talked about the addictive voice recognition technique, the lower brain, and not connecting mental health, life issues, spirituality, past traumas with this behavior, whatever it be, drugs, alcohol, food, sex, whatever, and separating the higher brain from the lower brain, stopped purging 100%. And I never did again. And that was, 17, 18 years ago.
Which is amazing. And that's really how we kind of got connected a long time ago, that you reached out and you were like, wow, this book really helped me too. And we both had the same experience. And what year was that you found that book? I
want to say like 18 years ago, I'm thinking.
Yeah. So around the similar time, I found it in 2005. And I think it was published in 1996. I actually looked it up before this call. And gosh, it was so powerful for both of us just to be like, okay, nothing is wrong with you. You've developed this habit in this primitive part of your brain. And you don't have to solve your whole life. You can actually just stop this behavior and you stop purging right away, which is incredible.
And never looked back. And I couldn't stop. And I thought, I'm going to die with this. I'll never get over it. Now, what's interesting is when I read your book, you and I are so similar in the mass quantities we consumed. You were an exercise bulimic. I was a vomiting bulimic, but you stopped on a dime. I stopped on a dime. What was a challenge for me then, not having had a normal upbringing with food, is getting clear with what to eat, how to eat. Like you probably, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but you had like a normal upbringing with food, sitting around a table, normal quantities. I didn't. So I struggled with that for years, not binging, no purging, none of that. But I was just I think guilty of eating too little at times, and then being starving, and then maybe a little bit of overeating, but the vomiting completely gone. Your book then saved me, and it took me some time to get the eating clear, get like, okay, I'm not eating enough here. I'm not eating adequately. You know, your big thing about eating adequately and the neuroplasticity and all that. That was phenomenal. And I was so grateful. And I applaud you for going up against, you know, the machine that is eating disorder recovery, because it did a lot of damage to me. If somebody like you came in and Trimpy came in when I was 13, I wouldn't have had wasted so many years and so much money on therapy and food.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful.
You know, your journey of learning to eat normally is, I think it's really important for people to hear, because in reading Jack Trimpey's book, which is directed toward alcohol and drug use primarily, you can just stop those behaviors. Like you can stop and never drink again. Whereas eating, you have to get up and eat every day. And if you're not eating enough, like you said, it's going to lead to those urges. It's going to lead to overeating. It's going to lead to, you know, just issues. So you have to learn to eat normally. What do you think kind of, you know, help you the most there? Can you kind of explain to the listeners how you were able to implement normal eating habits?
Well, it took a long time, but it was the recognition that I was not eating enough overall. I work out a lot. I dance. I'm just an athletic type. And I knew about gorging and I knew about starving. But to come to that middle ground, I think so much of it was you, like I said, saying, you know, eating adequately and just kind of putting the fear of food and gaining weight aside, and just trying to eat more, you know, and then not freaking out about it. Like, oh God, am I going to gain weight? Because I really never knew like normal portions. And now I try to eat a little bit with planned eating. It's a completely loose, you know, method that I have, but I have a little bit of a framework around what I eat, because I am not good with the hunger, fullness thing. What's odd is that I can be starving, and that's not for me like an impetus to eat because I'm used to starving in my youth. So I have to kind of work with it a little bit, like, okay, you got to eat now. And so I have a little bit of a framework around what I eat. And I don't eat the healthiest stuff because I don't want to get into the restriction. So I eat healthy, but I definitely allow myself what I want. So
yeah, I can definitely relate to that as well. And I think your plan for eating sounds really self-caring, because you know yourself, you know that in the past, your appetite signals kind of got thrown off, because of course they did, right? You're gorging yourself, you're starving. And even so many years later, those mechanisms just may not be where they would be if you never had done those things. So instead of using that as an excuse, like, oh, this is all messed up, so I can never learn to eat normally, you work with it and you help yourself through it. And I think that's really inspiring.
Yeah. I think the signals are there. It's just that the way I respond to them, like, for instance, as a child, I don't know that I even ever knew hunger because we were eating so much food. And then when I did feel hunger, I ignored it, you know, when I was hardcore dieting. So feeling the hunger, I have to go, okay, now it's time to eat. And then, you know, what the worst thing that I think, well, my mother did to me was just so much food, because when your stomach is stretched out at a young age like that, you know, you're used to those quantities. You're like, hey, where's the food? You know, and it's just, I can't even tell you the amount of regret that I have over just wasting so much time in my life on this pursuit. But I look at it like it wasn't my fault completely. A lot of these people are, particularly when you're young, you're a teenager and you're going to therapists and they're not putting you in the right direction, or you're going to OA and they're telling you you're powerless. That's why I loved his book, because he talked about take personal responsibility and you can do this. And this is separate from your life issues. And once I knew that clean cut thing, I was done with the purging. Like, I knew I was done with that part of it. And then of course I had to navigate how to eat.
Yeah.
And my fear around, oh, am I going to gain weight or something? But but it was done. Like that's why I so relate to you, because you had that instant recovery from your bulimia, and I did as well from the purging. However, it took me some time to get the eating more normalized. But yeah, I just said, if nothing else, I will never do this again. Like he talks about in the book, like alcohol, I will never do this again. And that's what I said. And I never have, and nor do I want to. So,
yeah. And everyone has their own path and their own journey. But the fact that you never returned to the vomiting, like even if you didn't feel comfortable with your eating habits, even if you didn't feel like you were getting it right, you just kind of drew a line and said, I will never go back. I will never cross that line again, which is amazing.
I made that commitment. I mean, even the thought of it now is horrifying. And I feel so bad for particularly young girls who get kind of seduced into that, because I know my mind at the time, a juvenile mind of 14, thought, oh, this is the answer. I haven't eaten much for a couple of years, and now I can have, banana splits and whatever, and then get rid of it. Like, that's what drives girls and boys and women into this, is just that kind of like, it's an answer, and it couldn't be further from the truth. It ruins your health for a disaster.
Yeah, sad. And they can see it as a temporary solution, but gosh, the long term is so scary and so damaging. And anything we can do to discourage young people from going down that path, it's just so important.
Yeah, I just am very grateful for your book, for his book, because honestly, if I didn't find his book, like I was like you, reading a million books, and I'd be in Barnes and Noble reading every recovery book, and I grabbed this one. I'm like, substance abuse, but who cares? I'll apply it to my thing. But it was phenomenal, as you witnessed as well.
One thing I want to mention is that we both kind of stopped on a dime, and you stopped your purging behaviors and your binging behaviors. I stopped mine as well. But stopping the exercise, I feel like, I don't want to say easier, but in a way it is easier. Stopping vomiting, there can be a lot of physical symptoms and bloating and things that go along with that. Do you remember around that time, like what helped you get through that period of ending vomiting and allowing your body to heal?
No, I was just, I used his book where, he said, never, not one day at a time, like, AA or OA, but never. And I used that to say, I'm done. And I honestly can't say I had that much physical reactions. I don't really honestly recall any. I just stopped. I mean, I was 20, it could have been 19, 20 years ago. He said, don't count time. So, but it's around that, the early 2000s, it might've been 2001, 3, 4. But, yeah, I didn't have any big reactions, and I was a hardcore vomiter. This was hardcore.
Yeah, I think people are scared of that, like scared of, oh, my body's going to retain water. And yes, there can be some bloating and things, but it's all things that your body can heal from. And of course, you can get whatever medical help that is necessary at the time. But, it's encouraging to hear that you can just stop. Like your body can do this.
Oh, absolutely. It's like people that stop, that 40 years of drinking or doing drugs, you can absolutely stop. And people do all the time.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest issue I had was that I was like, oh God, what am I going to eat now? And, navigating that. So
and how has, being free of these behaviors, how has this improved your life?
Oh, well, when I was involved in bulimia, like your life is not your own. You got to go home and vomit. Like, as grotesque as that sounds, you can't really go out and eat with people, because then what is that going to lead to? And, it's a disaster. Now, I'm not saying I did it every day. I'd have a day here, 3 days there where I didn't do it. But overall, it was almost 2 decades of this bulimia. But yeah, it frees you up to, go do your life and not engage in this behavior, which is consuming on its own, time consuming. It's very foreign to me to even think of like doing that. Yeah. And the risk to your teeth, to your heart, your esophagus can burst. I mean, there's so many downsides to it.
Yeah. It's great to talk to someone like me who's been recovered for so long. And just the thought of ever being in that place again, it does seem so foreign. I can really relate to you in that way. Like, it just seems like a lifetime ago in many ways.
Right. when you're so into, I think of it like pulling the rubber band so far in one direction, and in our case, or in my case of the starving, and then it's going to fly back to the other end, and then you're going to go, or I did go wild with eating, and then how do I get rid of it? And it's just, had there been an adult in the room, like I had a parent that was available, they would have said maybe like, eating 500 calories a day is not the answer. But I just saw, like, I just went with what I thought was the answer. And then when you start going to these therapists, they're not even getting into, like, for me, like, what are you eating? It's just, let's uncover the trauma. And that was like the last thing I needed, because the trauma was caused by the food. It wasn't the other way around for me.
Yeah.
So, and being an overweight child that's a whole other issue. That's kids are mean, like I said, I wasn't enormous, but I was fat, and that caused a tremendous amount of trauma and psychological distress in its own. Hence me wanting to get thin.
And that doesn't mean something is deeply wrong with you on a psychological level. It means you're overweight for reasons that are not your fault, by your parents overfeeding you. And the culture says you're not supposed to be that way. So understandably, you want to try to change it. And what way is promoted? It's dieting. So it's just all very innocent in a young child.
Right. And during this time in the 70s, when I was a child, they had the saying, I think it's the 70s, you can never be too thin or too rich. That was the time of hardcore, what do you call it, starvation diets and 3 bananas a day. And it was all that time of just very starvation kind of diet time. Now people are going more for the balanced kind of don't diet type thing. But that time was diet central, and I was right on board.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I started mine dieting in the, I guess, later 90s as a older teenager. So it was still very much that, like, eat as little as you can, restrict. And now it has changed. People are not wanting to go on those starvation diets anymore, which I feel like is a good thing, and it's progress for sure.
Yeah, it definitely is, because there was none of that at that time, even a book or anything, or even eat when you're hungry. That might have helped me if there was some kind of thing on that.
Mm-hmm.
And sadly, I did this at the time of puberty. So I kind of have come away relatively unscathed, but a lot of people don't,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're definitely lucky that we have found rational recovery and we were able to put a stop to this, because, like you said, some people in our generation weren't as fortunate.
Yes, definitely.
And all we can do is share our stories and hope other people don't go down the same path.
Right. I wish that people, me, I try to direct everybody to you and your books, because had I had your books back in the day at 14, 15, of course, you're so young and everything, but whatever, you weren't writing them then, but I was smart enough to have grasped that concept, and I would not have gone down the path that I've gone down. So, so you are just invaluable to people, and I applaud you for, continuing on, because, there's a lot of people that still are going like the other route, and, I'm powerless, and it's a disease. That was the other thing that was told to me. And I'm like, no. And you know what? Intrinsically, I knew it was all kind of ridiculous. Like, if I had listened to my gut, I'm like, a disease that I'm overeating, or a disease that somebody else is drinking alcohol. Like, I don't think so. Mm-hmm. As Trimpey says, our higher brain controls our hands. The lower brain cannot get us to put something in our mouth. So we are in control. Yeah. Our higher brain is in control. So,
and his book, you actually emailed me the other day to point out that still there's people, like, one of his most recent reviews on rational recovery, published back in 1996. One of the most recent reviews from 2023 is someone saying, this helped me recover from a multi-year eating disorder. So this is still helping people with eating issues.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's a great thing. And then your book drives home, what to do more. And it took me, honestly, years reading your books, like, to get to that point where I had the aha moment that I kind of overall wasn't eating enough, because I would get like, I'm starving. What's going on here? And I just wasn't eating enough. So now I'm not perfect, but I just, as I said, I'm doing good.
That's great. I'll ask you one more question about, as you learn to eat normally, I can kind of sense that a lot of people out there might be thinking, well, then what happened to your weight? And that can be a concern for people. And they think, oh, if I eat enough, I'm just going to gain a ton of weight. So has your weight stabilized to a place that you feel comfortable with it? And do you feel like you're at a healthy place for your unique body?
Yes. When I stopped purging, I was not overweight and I did not become overweight because by stopping the purging, I also stopped the mass eating. So eating reasonable amounts of food kept me at my normal weight. Because I think when people purge, there's residual in there of this.
Yeah, they're
food.
Still absorbing calories.
They're absorbing calories. So when I stopped the vomiting, I really didn't change in weight. And I am, of normal weight and have been for, decades. So, yeah.
And recovery isn't about weight, but it also, it's a concern for people. And I think it can prevent some people from stopping purging because they'll think, oh no, if I stop purging, I'm going to gain a ton of weight. But that's typically not the case. I mean, if you look at the research, people get to their highest weights ever while bulimic. It's behaviors that actually lead to weight gain over time, not weight loss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was not an issue. And I didn't think it was going to be an issue because I thought, if I'm going to stop purging, I'm not going to be eating these quantities.
Mm-hmm.
And once I stop eating those quantities, I'm not going to gain weight. Because then as an adult, I knew I don't have a glandular disease, which my child mind grabbed onto. So yeah, but I work out too. And that's important to me. And I'm not going to lie. I think everybody deep down wants to look good and all that. But believe me, it's not worth it getting into these behaviors to look good. You're better eating a balanced amount of food, working out in a balanced fashion, and your weight will probably be just fine in most cases.
Yeah, for sure. And just because you picked up some poor habits in childhood doesn't mean those habits have to continue throughout your life. Right. It's interesting. It's just another commonality between us. And mine was a lot more mild than yours, but I had the one parent who was like, oh, eat. It wasn't as extreme. And one parent, my father, was more like, watch your weight, control, what you eat. So I had like both extremes coming at me. And I think it does. It kind of messes with you a little bit.
Right. It's better to just, I don't know. You're a parent. Sounds like you know what you're doing, but
I don't know.
To overfeed kids is not a good thing because there's a high probability of them, becoming, a foodie times 10 and, overweight and then going into, other disorders. So it's a thing. But I will say that the commonality with you and I is when I read your book, I'm like, wow, the quantities that you would put down were just like me. And then you would exercise. Oh my God, 7 hours of cardio. Now that's unbelievable. But, same thing, just a different compensatory method, right? Mm-hmm. That we had, but same thing,
Yeah. And I hope what listeners will be encouraged by is both of us were pretty extreme in these behaviors and both were able to just stop on a dime and stay free for in my case, it's about 17 years. And it seems to be pretty similar for you as well.
Yeah. I'm doing the math. I'm thinking it's more like 20, but yeah, no, that is, I can't even think about it. Mm-hmm. It's such that part of it, the purging, it was horrific.
Yeah. So it's definitely possible for everyone out there to do this as well. And JD, do you have any final thoughts before we end today?
No, just to thank you, Catherine, for your fabulous books and your kindness and your caring for people. Like you said, you want to help one person. If the book helps one person, I'm sure it's helped thousands of people. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And for both of us, we also thank Jack Trimpey for his book, Rational Recovery, that really changed both of our lives as well.
Right. The new cure for substance addiction. So,
yes, for sure.
Thanks.
Thank you to everyone who listened to JD's story. I hope that it gave you ideas and motivation to end your own destructive habits. I also want to tell you that I set up a page on my website where you can read many inspiring recovery stories and also share your own if you want. It's at brainoverbinge.com/recovery stories. And the instructions to submit your own story are at the bottom of that page. I think it's extremely beneficial to read what has worked and not worked for others because it can give you new ideas and also help you realize that you're not alone and that recovery is definitely doable. And writing your own story also allows you to be a source of inspiration for others. I'd love to do more Recovery Stories episodes on the podcast in the future, so if that's something that you're interested in, you can also let me know that when you submit your story. The last thing I want to let you know about is that our awesome Brain Over Binge coach Julie is going to do another call that's open to everyone on Saturday, May 27th from 2 p.m. until 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. She's done several of these calls now, which are free of charge, to help you get to know her and her coaching style and to learn the benefits of coaching, and to determine if group coaching or one-on-one coaching is right for you. Everyone's path to complete freedom from binging is different, and a lot of the things that we talked about on this show as far as relearning normal eating and giving up dieting and having a peaceful relationship with your weight, these are all things that Julie is an expert at coaching people through. You can find a link to that open call in the show description, as well as links to sign up for group coaching, one-on-one coaching, or the Brain Over Binge self-paced course. Thanks so much for being here today, and thank you again, JD, for sharing your encouraging story. I know that everyone is capable of creating their own recovery story, so I want to encourage you and remind you that you have the power to change your brain and live a binge-free life. The Brain Over Binge podcast is produced and recorded by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC. All work is copyrighted by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC, and all rights are reserved. As a disclaimer, the hosts of the Brain Over Binge podcast are not professional counselors or licensed healthcare providers, and this podcast is not a substitute for medical advice or any form of professional therapy. Eating disorders can have serious health consequences, and you are strongly advised to seek medical attention for matters relating to your health. Please get help when you need it, and good luck on your journey. Need more help? You can find all of our current and upcoming options for support at brainoverbinge.com.